In 1976, Christopher Reeve had already made his Broadway debut. That same year, he went to Hollywood and won a small role in a submarine disaster movie called Gray Lady Down. Chris would later call the film a disaster about a disaster. Soon he was back in New York, appearing in an off-Broadway production, My Life. His co-stars were two other young up-and-coming actors.
So there was me and Chris and Jeff Daniels in this really tiny dressing room. Chris, he's got very wide shoulders, and he couldn't get in the door if you walk straight. He had to kind of turn his shoulders to get in.
While appearing in the play, Christopher Reeve's destiny was being shaped elsewhere. For several years, producers Ilya and Alexander Salkin had been planning a big-budget film of Superman. They were looking for just the right actor to bring the comic book hero to life. Chris first heard about the project from his actor friends Stanley Wilson and Michael O'Keefe.
Michael wanted to play Jimmy Olsen, and Chris and I both laughed and said, well, you're perfect, you should go get the role, and I wonder who they'll get as Superman, you know. And Chris didn't even mention it. I don't think it was even an inkling in him at that point that he might in fact play Superman.
But Chris's agent got his name on the list of actors being considered for the role. Although he met with the producers, he didn't take his chances at being chosen to play Superman too seriously.
One day he had an audition for an underwear commercial and an audition for Superman. And he came home very upset because he didn't get the underwear commercial. It would have been a lot of money. And said, oh yeah, I auditioned for Superman, and I'll never get that.
But much to his surprise, Chris won the part, hands down.
What happened was this guy, it was Superman walked into the room. He stepped off the page of that comic book.
The filmmakers asked Chris to fly to London for a series of screen tests, but he wasn't ready to give up his role off-Broadway in My Life. So Chris flew to London on the weekends and returned home to New York to perform the play 8 times a week.
He would come back in and I would help him with his lines. And in between helping him with learning the lines and the scenes, I would try to convince him not to do it. Because I thought, I just didn't think it was the best idea.
We were flying one day, and he turned to me and he said, you know, I'm up for the part of Superman, this big adventure film, and I'm thinking that I'm probably going to get it. I'm thinking of doing it. What do you think about that? And I said to him, I think it would probably ruin an actor's career.
They had him put on the Clark Kent glasses, I found out later, and that got him the part. I mean, he was this guy.
So I went from making $75 a week off Broadway to suddenly making quite a lot more of that.
For the role of Superman, Chris was paid $250,000, a lot of money for an unknown. With filming set to begin in London, Chris left for England on a friend's private plane.
And I remember standing on the side of the runway there and crying because I just knew that he was going into a different realm, and he would very soon be earning a lot of money and gaining a lot of attention, and life was going to change for him.
The first change for Chris was his physique.
He was skinny back then. He was tall and beautiful, but definitely a string bean.
And then off he went to the gym and did, as Chris always does with everything he does, did it 100% and ended up with this gorgeous, gorgeous body.
Rising star Margot Kidder was cast as Lois Lane, the sidekick of Superman's alter ego, Clark Kent. For the two actors, it was hardly love at first sight.
When Chris and I first began working together, we were not enamored of each other. I mean, I was chaos. I would come charging into scenes not having planned anything, and I'd go with this and I'd go with that. Christopher would just be horrified at this out-of-control berserko person.
In several months, however, his relationship with his volatile co-star began to improve.
Then the brother-sister bickering turned into a real brother-sister relationship. We were strapped in those harnesses hanging from that ceiling for months on end, so we got really, really close. And I think that's what made it work on screen.
Oh, can I take you to the airport?
Not unless you can fly. Clark.
Hmm?
Ladies.
Sorry.
Change my clothes. Thank you.
Well, hey, Lois, maybe we could... Lois?
Would you be a pet mail that for me? Thank you.
Oh, sure. Night.
But the long hours and 18-month shooting schedule took their toll on Chris.
I think Chris was very lonely in London. Before he left, he would say, you know, I'm still going to be the same old Chris, you know, sneakers and dirty blue jeans. And I think when he got to London and everybody was addressing him as Superman and talking about him as Superman, he yearned for someone who knew him as Chris in the sneakers and the dirty blue jeans.
Chris's lonely days came to an end one day as he stood in line for lunch at the studio commissary. There, he met a London modeling executive named Gay Exton. Within months, the two were inseparable.
Gay was a very grounding force in his life at that point.
Gay Exton was she was a wonderful woman. She was a lot of fun, and they were a great pleasure to be with. And in those days, it was all, you know, it was parties.